Okay, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back, I guess, to part 4 of the rugby physical preparation pyramid. My name's TJ Jankowski. I am the guy behind Rugby Muscle, and as you will notice already, this video doesn't have a whiteboard in it, and that is deliberate because I wanted to get more into the nitty-gritty, and that required a lot more of rather than just using the whiteboard. It required an actual presentation to use, or just like slides in general, because I think this will help you guys understand it. Now, this might turn off quite a few of you guys. Like, you'll see how long this video is. It's probably going to be 15 to 20 minutes long, ideally 15 minutes. We'll see at the end, and it's going to be pretty in-depth. But to me, like, that's the point, because if you're someone that wants to get to the level of developing an athlete and training as an athlete, and to really go above the base of the pyramid, then this stuff requires a lot more deeper thought. This requires the attention, and if you cannot stand to watch a 20-minute video to improve yourself, that's fine. Go back, watch the base stuff, and just focus on that. Like, it's not rocket science. You know, you can keep your training really simple, and you can keep progressing. If you want to then make it more complicated, and you want to get a little bit more bang for your buck, you've earned yourself the right to do this. You've built a strong base. You want to go on and build more of a total athletic physique and performance, and you want to train that way, then this is the stuff for you, and this is the stuff that you have to get into. So watch how cool this is, huh? Yes, boom. All right, so this is part 4, level 2, the athlete. So we're going to go into it here. We've got to revisit the pyramid, of course, because, you know, I might sound like a broken record here, but this is so important, okay? You've got to understand that without the foundation, without some genetics, which will dictate how high you can build up your pyramid, your habits and your consistency, like, you have to set that as a base. That is going to dictate how high you can build your pyramid. Yes, you cannot do anything about your genetics, and your habits and consistency will revolve around the training, but the more you stick around to this stuff, the bigger your potential to build the pyramid. I know I sound like a broken record, but that stuff is really going to dictate the height of the pyramid that you can build, the actual potential of athleticism that you can create through training. There are a lot of other ways that you can improve at rugby rather than just building your athleticism, but if we're looking at from a physical performance standpoint, that's it, okay? Or from a physical preparation standpoint, this is everything that you need to understand, okay? So then we've spoke about in the last video all the different ways that you can train to become a better human, as in a more efficient human from a physiological standpoint or from a physical standpoint. Not a better human as in, your ethics and whatnot. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how good a human you can be when it comes to rugby performance, okay? So we're talking about your hypertrophy, your aerobic capacity, your movement control. And there's a reason that's the base. There's a reason that I've created this graphic this way to represent that the human is that big a important part of your training, and it is that big a factor in how high and how great your rugby performance can be through training. Then we've got level 2, athlete, speed and power output, core control, absolute strength. That's what we're going to go into today's video. And remember that minutia stuff, special strength stuff, footwork, mobility, anaerobic endurance, toughness, which I've actually taken off, and I'll explain that in the next video. But that's the stuff that people always want to focus on. But as you can see from this graphic, like it forms like such a minuscule part of your total training potential that it's so frequently focused because that's what the professionals focus on, or it's just so frequently focused on just because, right? Because we see other people done because it's fancy and whatever. But we'll get into that in the next video. But understand that this is the context of everything, okay? So why do we put this in this order? Why is why can't we train for speed and power output and core control and absolute strength before we train for aerobic capacity, movement control, and hypertrophy? Excuse me, I also have a sip of my drink. Why is aerobic capacity, movement control, and hypertrophy, like, why does that set the precedent? Why does that take more importance? Why should that take up the vast majority of your training compared to it. And we're going to go into more specifics as to why, but like one of the easiest explanations is this. Okay, your speed and power output is going to be limited by your aerobic capacity. The better aerobic athlete you are, the more consistently you can work on your speed and power output. If you just cannot like keep it together for more than 5 to 10 minutes, then you're kind of useless in a game of rugby anyway. So it doesn't matter how fast you are for those 5 to 10 minutes, because you're out of the game. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, because you'd only affect 1 out of every like 40 rucks. You know what I mean? So and you can't train in this stuff. If you don't have aerobic capacity, you can't train your speed and power output, because you just get gassed straight away. And it's something that people lose sight of a lot of the time, because they want to work their speed and power. But if you can't sustain a level of performance or recover from a level of performance to keep sustaining it, then you have no business doing that type of training. Same with your core stuff. Like if you're just overall not able to move well in general, like you can't hold a good squat pattern, you can't control a good hinge pattern, your running mechanics are way off, then doing all fancy stuff with your core, it can help, but it's going to be severely limited. And then finally, same thing with hypertrophy, whereby like the majority of your strength gains are going to come from your muscle size. There's a reason that we have weight classes in combat sports and in a lot of athletic sports, right? And weightlifting and stuff, because the bigger your muscle is, the more strength potential it has, and in general, like the bigger you are, the stronger you are. So getting bigger is going to take care of a lot of that strength in general already. And then it doesn't work the other way around. So you can't just train for strength and expect to get bigger. Okay, obviously being bigger does have its advantages, rugby. Being stronger does as well. I've put absolute strength there. I've just realised. What a plonker. Anyway, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna ignore that it says absolute strength. Same thing for your core control. You can have a really good plank, but if you can't run properly, you can't squat properly, it's not going to benefit you in a game of rugby. And same thing if you again, like I said before, if you can do 2 really good sprints and then you just drop off and you cannot sustain that performance, that's not going to help you in a game of rugby. So really understand that it doesn't work that way around. Okay, and actually, if I was to make it even more to draw actually a more accurate way of this, the way this works is that, I think I've said this in the other video, so again I guess it might sound like a bit of a broken record, but aerobic capacity will help all of these other areas. Okay, you can continue to work on your strength and get a lot more quality volume in if you're aerobically more sound. Same with the amount of core control that you can do. Same thing for your movement control, which affects your speed and power output, but also it affects your absolute strength, because part of absolute strength is coordinating muscles together to fire in the right way to produce a huge amount of force using different movements or different muscle groups. And then hypertrophy is also going to help your speed and power output, because you, again, with the force generation and your core control. If you've just got, if you just completely lack muscle mass, then you might have some sort of core control, but as you'll see when we get into actually what core control features, you'll see that if you have a decent frame about you, you're going to control your core that much better. So let's get into it. So speed and power output, what is it, or what is all this stuff? So speed and power output is creating effective impacts on the game. So this is sort of your bread and butter of actually what you do when you feature in a game of rugby, right? It's an effective carry, or it's an effective tackle, or it's an effective ruck, either being a nuisance at the breakdown as a defender, or you're actually like an actual being a nuisance, not just resting on the ruck, or you're actually making a tackle, or you're trying to get a turnover, or you're securing the ball for your team, you're driving on your teammate, you're latching on to a carry that he's had, you're making yourself available for an option for an offload. All this stuff requires a bit of a speed and power output. Same with set plays if you're a forward, and the same with just in general carrying and taking and attacking the defensive line as a back. Okay, never more than 5 to 10 seconds of output. And then the way that we would train for it would be with either full recovery or incomplete recovery. The better your capacity is, the more you can handle with incomplete recovery. The better your output is, overall output, the more effective you're going to be with full recovery each time. Okay, so your output is your absolute limit, like how effective you can be in those 5-10 seconds, and then your capacity is how long you can sustain that with little bouts of incomplete recovery. Core control is transferring the force from across your body, so either from limb to limb, or from side to side, or from your right leg to your left arm to create a big tackle. That would be core strength, where you can sort of really transfer that force, and then controlling counter forces to produce force in the intended direction. Sounds kind of wordy, right? But essentially what you're doing is resisting outside forces and trying to keep a strong core or base yourself. So if you, for example, good core stability will allow you to get into a good jackling position, and then have forces of other people trying to out-ruck you coming on you, and you hold your strong position. Or if you're carrying, you've got someone dragging on one of your arms, maybe they're grabbing one of your short legs, or legs of your shorts, I don't know how you would phrase that. But they're grabbing on you, they're trying to pull you in different directions, and you continue to go forward, or you continue to go sideways, you continue to go in a direction that you're intended, or isometrically holding a position like you would do in a ruck. That would be more your stability element. Now, nowhere with this core stability do we talk about fucking Swiss balls, okay? I'm going to start it and end it there. Absolute strength, we're talking about force production, so absolute force production, just how simply how much force you can express in one action. So most of the time it's going to be a simple expression. Something like a bench press is simple, whereas something like a clean and jerk is not simple at all. So I wouldn't call that absolute strength, how much you can clean and jerk, because it requires a lot of coordination. Whereas what we're talking about here is a squat, which requires a little bit of a level of getting the muscles to fire properly in the the right direction, but it's still quite simple, right? An expression of how much weight you can use. How do we train for this stuff? So let's look at speed and power output first. For speed and power output, we would do explosive movements, full body. If we're looking at speed, we're looking at short sprints, acceleration 5 to 20 meters. If you're a winger, you might be interested, or someone that's interested in top speed, that might feature as well. But that would require some build up. But even then, you wouldn't sprint for 20 seconds. You would slowly build up and then sprint as fast as you can for that 5 to 10 second output. You can also use specialized movements such as push presses and stuff for line out carries. You can be quite creative with this. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Things like half moons, things like different grappling drills. But the idea is that you are being as explosive and as powerful as you possibly can, as fast as you possibly can, but with some resistance. Should be really overly taxing for 5 to 10 seconds. You kind of have to stop. And then if you're going for output, then you're going to rest for about a minute. If you're going for capacity, you're going to have incomplete recovery, which is another 10 to 15 seconds, and then you're going to go again. 5 to 30 reps. These can be different movements for each one, but 5 to 30 total reps, 1 to 3 times a week, and you would build up the reps as you would go, and you would try and go faster and more powerful as you would go. These can only be done on high days. So important. It has to be 95+% effort. If you're doing anything less, then you're not working speed and power output. You're kind of just working this poor lactic acid sort of system, anaerobic sort of work, and it's not giving you the speed and power output that you want. Core control is isometric holds, controlled movement through different planes, so different rotation movements, different complex movements, where you're really trying to control the body in the direction that you want to do, nice and slow. And then loaded and resisted carries I've put here is probably the best way to train for that sort of anti-rotation or anti-lateral flexion or anti-flexion movement. So different carries. You can be creative and with how you want, depending on how you want to control your core. 10 to 30 seconds of work, 2 to 6 sets per session, 2 to 4 times a week. This can be done. Again, you can get really creative with this, kind of like what I said in the last video with a lot of the other training. With core control, you can get really creative. It can be done as prep work, it can be done as supersets, it can be done as circuits, where it can sort of interlink with the other training modalities. And it can be done just at the end of your session, like abs. Key point here with core control is that it isn't just developing abs. So movement control and hypertrophy, which I spoke about in the last one, that would cover a lot of the base of your core control by just getting strong abs. So you would do things like actual like hanging leg raises and basic planks. That would build up a lot of the core that you would need before doing this stuff. Increase resistance and complexity as you go. Don't start really complex, keep it simple, and then build it as you go. And then as you go over time, you'll try and increase that control, but the resistance and complexity is what you try and add to add progressive overload each week. Absolute strength, then, real simple stuff. You should know how to do absolute strength if you've made it this far in this video series. But simple barbell or machine-based work. You can do leg presses, you can do any machine-based work. In fact, that kind of help because it doesn't require as much skill, and you can really work on the absolute strength of it. Remember that we're not power lifters, we're training here for rugby. Minimal skill and stability effort, that's what that refers to. So cleans and stuff might be out, even squats might be out. Maybe you can make it simple like leg presses, or reverse lunges are quite good ones as well. You're going to try and work 80% plus of the 1 rep max, and you want to go from 6 reps to 1 or 2 reps, 20 to 5 total reps in total. And I've gone down there because you want to increase the load as you decrease the volume. So you want to get heavier and heavier and heavier each week, and those reps will drop off and you'll start to get heavier each week. Keep accommodating that resistance, keep pushing it heavier, and then you're going to develop your strength, and then you would taper and go again. Only do these again on high days. Avoid movements that cause too much fatigue, and just be generally smart about it. And that same could be said for all of this stuff, because this stuff is mostly fatiguing, and we'll get into that in this next slide here. So in terms of effectiveness, like your speed and power output can absolutely have a huge effect on how good you can play rugby. Core control and absolute strength is like minimally, actually it's specifically effective for the different areas that you want to train and how you want to develop as a player. All of these things are important, and that's why this is rung 2, not the very top of the pyramid. The key here though is for how much you can train is these next few components. So speed and power output is great, but it's short-term gains. After about 8 to 10 weeks max, probably for most of you guys, you're probably going to be tapped out, and you should focus on another area before, because you're only going to really make minimal improvements. Even like absolute sprinters won't spend too much time just working absolute speed. They have to develop themselves slowly but surely over time. So working their hypertrophy, working their other things, working their aerobic stuff before they get back into it. So it's very short term. You can't be spending your whole year just working speed and power, especially if you just got all these other components you need to do for rugby. But speed and power output does have a medium fatigue cost, so you can do it and feel relatively fresh the next day. It's not overly taxing, but you do have to be really fresh to be able to do it. So it costs you on the other side because you can't cause too much fatigue in other areas. You've got to be fresh when you're doing this stuff. It's obviously dependent on movement control and aerobic capacity. So the better you move, the more power and speed you're able to express because you're moving better as well. And then it's also the reason that you would train it not as frequently is because it's indirectly trained with rugby. You're doing a lot of speed, you're doing a lot of power movements when you're doing your rugby training and playing rugby anyway. Core control, similar in a way, like it will be medium-term gains. Like you can't just continually work on these funky core movements forever and have a great return on your investment. Eventually there's going to be a point where you get diminishing gains, then you would switch it and move on to other areas. It's not overly fatiguing, although it is not advisable to do it when your lower back can be compromised in other areas, so you've got to be quite smart with it with that. And again, it's highly dependent on your strength. If you've got someone that's really weak and tiny, it doesn't matter how well they hold their plank. If you just grab their arm and yank them, you're going to pull them in the direction they want to be in. Whereas if you've got someone that's big and strong and they've got a strong core, you try and yank them, they might be a lot more steadier. And it's also trained indirectly again with like contact training, with your rucking, with your rugby training that you're doing. Like the better your technique with this stuff, the better you're going to be. And then finally, absolute strength. You can work on absolute strength for the long term and continually sort of make small improvements for sure. It is highly fatiguing though, particularly in rugby season. It can be highly fatiguing. It takes up a lot of time because you've got to rest for quite a big period of time as well between sets if you're working. absolute strength. It's also semi-dependent on hypertrophy. So you going back to that slide we spoke about earlier, you might actually be better off just spending some of your time in hypertrophy and increase your relative strength, which will still increase your absolute strength, just at a lower rate. So going back to the pyramid, you'll see that's why this stuff is level 2 only. It's not the most important stuff. It can have a lot of benefits, as you've seen. I advise you guys will feature these 3 components as part of your training, but I would say that they shouldn't get in the way of really working on, obviously, your foundations, so your habits and your consistency, but the other 3 stuff as well, because you can continually train those 3 things. So as always, Rugby Muscle is here to help. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Ask any questions that you have on this below. But if you're really interested, Team Rugby Muscle or Rugby Muscle Elite will, I put this stuff together for a living. This is what I do to help you guys out. If you want to be creative, that's about as rigid a guidelines as I can give you. And from there, you sort of will build your own plan. Next video, we'll talk about the special prep stuff. But remember that that's just the icing, okay? So don't hold out for that thinking that's going to be the most important thing. If you spent the whole of your training career, you would develop 95+% of your full potential as a rugby player by just working on this stuff. Other stuff can be fun to train, and we'll get into it in the next video. But overall, thank you guys so much for watching. Thumbs up if you made it to the end and enjoyed this. Ask any questions on this below. I'll see you guys in the next one.